Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Holy Human podcast, a podcast devoted to those who live to bridge worlds. We dive into nuanced conversations about the full spectrum human experience. We explore the dance of polarity, the mystery of life, and God. This is a space where the masculine and the feminine, the mystical and the practical, the mind and the body, the holy and the human come together. My name is Felix Whitman. I'm your host, and I invite you to today's episode. Today, I'm joined by Hannah and Clay, two wonderful individuals living together as a couple for many years now. Hannah is an erotic artist, hieros, gamos, alchemist, and energetics maven. Her brand, Embodied Gnosis, is here to serve women in sourcing their knowing, safety, and power internally, and living deeply embodied, meaning inhabiting their physical and psychic senses in their essence. Clayton is a spiritual law practitioner, holding the light for others, seeking to actualize and live into their God-given freedoms. Together, they also work with couples to support their entering and fortifying inside the mystical state of union. They are both certified coaches and ordained ministers, committed to the path of truth, love, and liberation, in service to humanity and to God. In this conversation, they both share the experience of what it means to live in not just an ordinary romantic partnership, but in an actual, embodied, generative union. Sacred union, if you will. So, without further ado, let's jump right into the episode. Hi Hannah, hi Clay. Welcome to the Holy Human podcast.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Yeah, great to be here.
So this is our second time recording this. We are excited to dive into it another time, and let's see what wants to come through. Starting with the topic, the very relevant topic, obviously the two of you sitting here together in union. So let's dive into sacred union, and I want to direct the first question to you, Hannah. Just give us a little overview, a little definition of what sacred union, I mean, it's an often heard and used term in our community, but what does it mean for you?
Yeah, thank you. I feel for me, union is really characterized by having a shared energetic field. And the way that we often frame this and teach this is like there's a third body that is greater than the sum of its parts. And so through that third, there's a way that we get to maintain our sovereignty and fully share. And so it's not just like we're merging and collapsing into each other, but we are fully sharing and cultivating energy together in this third body, and we're both in service and devoted to the well-being and the transparency and the way that field of union, this third body, calls both of us forward into more truth and love, and really wants the greatest for each of us in our own journeys. And that's what makes it sustainable, and that's why it endures, is because we are continually evoked into more and more of what feels like true desire and destiny and heaven on earth.
I love that.
And that's just, initial.
An initial opening Yeah, what would you say is the difference between like sacred union partnership in particular versus just a normal partnership, a romantic partnership?
I love this question. And, to me, there is a very important phase, or, how I've termed this is like there's a gate of nobility that we go through. And what I would say is like the partnership phase. And this is where it's like all of our shadows and our young parts and our wounded parts are coming up. And it's like the way that we move through those initiations, there's this graduation where we go through this gate of nobility and enter into this field of union. So to me, there's like a phase, and everyone wants to skip this phase, right? And just be like, here we are, we're kings, we're queens, we're in union, and it's like really going through the grueling fires of initiation to die and be reborn into union. That is often, it's not glamorous, but it's essential. And I don't think that we have true organic union without this phase of, really, because when more of you is being called forward, right, we have to shed skins, and that can be painful. And I really believe no matter how much healing we do before we come into sacred union, it will bring up everything that wants attention or needs attention, right? All of the places from our early development and our like all of our developmental phases, right, that are seeking resolution. Union comes in to bring resolution to those parts. And it's not to say that once you go through the gate of nobility, it's all done, but that is when there's like a stabilized, coherent field of union.
A stabilized, coherent field of union. And would you say that is when the third part comes alive, like really? Or when is this third part that you were talking about coming in?
No, the third is always there. The third is there in every relationship in a sense, because it's the connection itself. And I think the Gene Keys really helps me with this understanding. But it's like every time there's two, there's a third, because there's a relationship between the two. So every relationship has a third. And, every family constellation has a different third to it. Like every constellation of people has a different like energetic field of relationship between them all. And we can always have attention on connection and say like, what is this connection asking for? Like what would serve connection here? So the third can be like a guiding light as you're moving through the more like gauntlet phase of nobility. And what I would say is like opening up into the field of union is when both of your auras are now contained by this third aura.
That's a beautiful way of putting it.
Like before, it's like a thread between the two of you, and then it's like you go through this gate and it like now holds and contains both of you.
And how's the higher purpose of that sacred union coming into that?
It's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, I would add it in a way of answering that. I would add to say that, when we came together, one thing we were very clear on is there was a mutual devotion to truth and to God in a particular way through truth. And I think us both taking
And
that
to
on.
our soul evolution, I would say, in particular.
Yeah. And so I think us each taking that on, it requires a lot of surrender, because we're constantly offering all of ourselves up. And there's this way that, at least for me, that I thought I thought I wanted to be a certain thing. And what I found is that by orienting to what is true, that a lot of who I thought I was and what I thought I wanted to be burned away. And what emerged as a result of that, and I think this is true for both of us, and because we're both committed to that for ourselves and together, is that what's actually, there for us to bring forth comes forward. And so because our union is mutually devoted to that, I think that it activates, that we know kind of who we are in a shared space and way together. Is that how you
We
kind of
know
hear
our
it?
we.
Yeah, we know our we. And it becomes less about what I want for myself and more about, okay, how does it feel for both of us together? And that shared connection, is something that I can like feel the health of and like feel how vibrant and alive it is and choose to serve, what wants to come through for our connection. And I think that's what helps it emerge for me, if that answers the question.
And I think what you're speaking to too is like the path of truth being a path of loss, in the sense that what is false is going to be burned away, or sometimes more gently fall away. I've been really leaning into how gentle can it be lately. I know I brought the fire a little bit earlier, and it just feels like now, yes, there's still things that fall away, but it becomes more easeful and graceful, and the more soft and malleable and we are, right? And what I was hearing too is it's like the distinction that I make, and how when I feel like a partnership or a union or a relationship is truly ordained by God, by the Most High, is that we can recognize that the only things we lose are things that are not true. There's no compromising what feels like a true, organic, essential part of our being. There's room for all of that. And then things that might be like more egoic, more klesha, right? Like all of that will be asked to go. But really holding that distinction of like, if it's true and it feels like my essence, the person that is ordained for me, like all of that gets to be included.
Wow. That's powerful. Powerful way of soul evolution, so to speak. And I like how you brought up the term moving through the transformation more gracefully. So my next question would be like, what are ways to ease more into transformation? Because I can relate very much that with the current energies, the world at hand right now, it can all be extremely uncomfortable, extremely like rough, and it's like almost you're grasping for air because you're drowning in the waters of transformation. And so within that union container, how do you install a more graceful way of transformation? Because I mean, you're always connected, right? And then that always sparks for more transformation. So yeah.
The first thing that came to me as you were talking is like, you're in your Saturn return, aren't you?
Yeah.
So I don't
Very
know.
soon.
So I don't know how easeful and graceful that gets to be.
Yeah.
No, it's
How
a
old are
reckoning.
you two, if I may ask? I've never asked you guys.
Yeah. I just turned 33.
And I'm 31.
Mm-hmm. So you already moved through your Saturn return.
We were together for
We
it.
moved through it together. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my oh my God.
And
How
so
was that?
it's a reckoning.
Uh-huh.
It's totally a reckoning. And so, the first layer that comes through when you ask that is like, on the other side of your Saturn return, it really smooths out and becomes more easeful and graceful. That's been my experience. And like, I wouldn't say at any point we, yeah, well, because you went through yours a bit before, and
Just
not to
barely.
make this
Yeah.
whole conversation about Saturn returns. I'm not like even a huge astrology person. I just find with Saturn returns in particular, it's like psychologically backed up that like our brain finishes maturing during our Saturn return. So it's sort of like the last phase of brain development, which is pretty cool. So it's like indigenous shamanic wisdom has known this forever, that we're not really adults until the end of our Saturn return. And I think that's just kind of cool. But as far as like, to me, seeing, and I don't remember, I think this is also some wisdom that I picked up along the way. I don't know exactly where, and I don't want to misattribute anything, but the idea that our unconsciousness lets go of us, and we don't need to try and like clear things and pull things off and like make things go away. And like all of that energy of againstness actually perpetuates our bond with whatever we're trying to remove. And so for me, and I would say for us, like part of the path has always been like, how can we add heat and add light to change the frequency or the phase of matter, right? From like solid to liquid, or from like, bringing in more light to increase the frequency, to then essentially have what's unconscious, or if not unconscious, because unconscious can become conscious and be integrated and become something really beautiful. But like the things that are dense or miasmatic or karmic or trauma, whatever, it's like if we can either phase shift from like by adding heat from solid to liquid, or if we can add light so the frequency is higher, I see it as like these crusts fall off. So it's like I'm not trying to like pull this thing off, but actually I'm just like heating it up or starting to move faster at a higher frequency inside, and it falls off on its own. So it's really, I think, if you want to add grace, stop trying to remove things, like release to the best of your ability any againstness in your system, because when you have againstness, you're actually, and this is like one of the things that I'm glad this is here, like hate is a very strong bond. Hate is not disconnection. Hate is a very strong bond. Like you're very much bonded with that energy, and it's an illusion that you're disconnected from it. You're actually strongly bonded if you have contempt or like resentment or something like that. So it's like really, it's not about like separating yourself from anything. But to me, it's like fortification from within, and like letting your frequency take care of the external, and what is not a match for you will be carried away, and having trust in that process.
I so love this, Hannah. It aligns so well with the work that I'm doing with clients, like the somatic work and parts work, where it's also, I like the organicness of it. We are not trying to get rid of certain parts that are just innate within us. We're trying to reach a state of integration where things come together and work in harmony together. And so, yeah, I really love the idea of just cultivating that inner light, and everything else just falls away or integrates in a way.
Yeah, and darkness, right? It's like, I also think it's important to, because even as I say the light, it's like, I also, to me, it's like there's a really beautiful organic darkness, and then sometimes we call all of the things that we want to get rid of like the darkness. And I also think having a relationship with the mystery is having a relationship with the darkness and the purification that happens inside of that sort of like cosmic womb, 0 point, as also being essential. Because is so long as you don't have a relationship with that, you'll be in fear of it, and then you'll be trying to push things away.
What's your relationship, Clay, to that aspect that Hannah just mentioned, like the mystery, the organic darkness, if you will?
Yeah, good question. I think I can see in myself times where I've sort of tried to prematurely, like,
Eject.
eject out of any sort of like relationship that keeps coming up in my field, right? So how I experience how I work with life in kind of all ways is like what's coming up in like my relationships, not just with Hannah, but everywhere. You know, what am I being presented with in the key areas of my life? And I think what's happened is if I'm experiencing like a looping problem, right? It keeps coming up and it keeps coming up, and it's like, oh, I just wish this thing would change. Then, you know, I have all these clever ways where I would try and distance myself from that thing. Like, I'm like, oh, if I, you know, if I just like let it in, or if I, you know, resist surrendering a part of myself is probably a big one as far as our union goes. You know, when we first got together, I had very different views spiritually than I do now, and my frankly my discernment for what was serving me was a lot lower. And to have that rise within me, you know, it takes heat. There's this alchemical fire of calcination, right? And it's like what burns away all the impurities. And in order for that fire to sort of overtake the being, like you have to heat up and heat up and heat up. And that process in my system of literally physical heat, you know, rising is super uncomfortable at times. But my relationship with it now and what has started to develop as it's like, oh, I'm confronting darkness. I'm sitting with the parts of myself that I don't want to admit are mine, or the choices that I don't want to admit that I'm making, right? I make an excuse where I say, you know, oh, this is out of my control. Like I'm helpless and being impacted by the waves of life, and actually staying with it and recognizing, oh, here's where I play into these patterns. And then it can burn off. And then what happens, and what I feel so grateful for, is that there's like a clarity that emerges in like the center of my being, where it's like, oh, I can see clearly, I can see clearly, I can see clearly. And so now when I notice that part of like I'm, you know, sort of like getting hit by like a wave of life, I'm like, okay, like I know how this goes on some level, so how can I be with this to allow like what's clear and true for me to emerge and actually have a relationship with this fire.
Mm. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
can I name something that I feel like is
Yeah.
really coming through in the way that you brought that, which is
Of course,
like
Hannah.
which is like sexual energy
Mm-hmm.
being one of the primary ways that you add heat, and then also tends to be where we confront the most darkness
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm.
reclaim it.
Hmm. I love how you said, Clay, you know how this goes when life hits, like another wave of life comes, and you know, you know how this goes, and then how can you sort of like surrender to it and yeah, let everything burn away that is not true.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a
So
beautiful way
yeah.
where like there's a general way where we can see the divine in all things, but it's only true in like the most general sense. And I think what discernment invites from us is a specificity to emerge. And like that's where boundaries live, that's where discernment lives, right? And we get to actually see what's truly serving our own highest potential. It doesn't make the rest of the world wrong.
Mm.
It just means that we're starting to actually be able to hold God in a very specific sense in our body and operate with that. And there's a fantastic, you know, as these parts that were like, oh, I don't want to lose this. Who will I be on the other side of this? This is the only way I know myself. When some of those aspects of like my personality or whatever it is, when they leave, suddenly I realize how much of a burden it was to carry them and like to have them not be fully true for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, wow, this lightness of being that I get to experience as this burns off is something I end up being so grateful for, even if the process of losing it, you know, I have to grieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I'm just going to say, like, with sex and sexual energy, that's where some of the most performance is conditioned into us.
Yeah.
And so, like, we're
Hmm.
very, very passionate about, like, this is something that we have to go into and bring, because it's so sensational, and like it's so sensational, which makes it hard to keep our attention on it and to stay conscious through that amount of sensational experience. And that is really where the layers start to melt off quite quickly. And, you know, to just also what you were saying about like discernment and boundaries, and like, my goodness, in the beginning of our relationship or in the nobility phase, that was like a big spot for us, and a big way that I saw transformation in you and also in me. But like I really struggled to feel like we had a mutual level of discernment. And the reason mutuality is so important is because in this field of union, it has an energetic circuitry. And that energetic circuitry, both people are pouring into and receiving from. And so having like, not just like mutual alignment of values and mutual alignment with the same spiritual principles, but also like mutual devotion, mutual quality of attention, and mutual discernment, right? It's all part of the circuitry.
I love that. And so interesting, because in the field I could already feel like, okay, discernment is something I want to bring up, because it's something that also draws me to you guys, that I really appreciate about you, is sort of being very like you're having a strong discernment, both of you, because when you're in the community, like the spiritual new age kind of community, there's a lot of, I know we both, the two of you and I myself, we went through this phase of like confronting the false light and all of the new age distortions, and like discernment, like really cultivating discernment is so important, like wielding the sword of truth. And so it's very interesting that you're saying it's so important as well to have like a mutual level of discernment in that union. Because what I think would be very difficult is when one partner has like a lower level discernment and the other one a higher level, then one person always brings like garbage into the relationship, right? And the other one has to clear it up in a way, if that makes sense. And then you don't have that mutual, like the circuitry it's just clogged in a way.
It's a leak.
Okay. It's a leak.
It'll
Makes sense.
become depleting. And so mutuality, ultimately all of the things, the aspects or the principles of mutuality is so that it gets to be mutually mutually enlivening. So that it, and you know, one of the other ways that sometimes I talk about it, and how you can distinguish like an organic union or a sacred union from like just like conscious relationship or spiritual partnership or anything that might call itself that, is, you know, you look at, is it furthering people's creations into the world? Because, you know, I would say a consumptive relationship, which is like when people end up like totally stuck in processing, or like, you know, you might see this in a relationship where there's like more open energy and it's like, oh, I'm just constantly being like sucked into like repair and, you know, doing all of this work to like maintain the union. And that's a consumptive relationship. Like, I'm very clear that I'm only available for a generative partnership and a generative union, which means that it's furthering not just mine, but ours, each of ours individually and ours together, purpose, mission, art, creativity, and service in the world.
Yeah, I love that. I call it, in my work, exiting the healing loop and entering like creation mode. And in creation mode, you're always being called forth to heal and integrate more of yourself. In healing mode, you're not really creating anything. You're just looping in trauma and healing, and there's nothing that you're actually birthing forth. So that brings me to an interesting topic, like your creation. Like, what are you guys bringing into the world as a union, a couple? If you want to share, of course.
Yeah. Well, we have a few things that feel really alive right now, and one of the main ones is we just established a church. When we spoke last, it was pending, and now it's officially been birthed into the world. So
Yes.
our church, yeah, our church is Triunity Temple, and triunity in the sense that, as we've kind of spoken a bit about, like, it really honors the, one becomes two, becomes three, becomes one again, and this notion of the third, and how much that's really served us in our own union, but how much it's also just a principle in creation, and so within this organization, there's a lot of different things that we're offering, but we'll have a space for membership. We're going to be doing a next iteration of our union-based program. Inside of it, I mean, we have a lot coming to life really naturally through this structure, and it's felt really important to both of us as we've gone through this journey to bring forth something that we really feel consciously is in alignment with like God's law, and living and existing in the world, and operating in the world in a structure that serves God very overtly, and so we're really grateful for that in a big way.
Well, and let's tell them the name of our group container that is
Organic architecture, yeah.
And from the beginning, we birthed this container 3 years ago, and the name is it's so beautiful to me because it really is about intimacy that endures, and what actually, and the foundation being truth. Like, truth is the only thing that's sustainable and that endures the storms of life, the tests of time, all of that. And so as our relationship has been in some ways, so too has the bringing to life of the church. It's been this slow burn, where we've been asked to really zoom in on the micro bit by bit, and be fortified and aligned bite by bite as we walk this path. And so the church has been 3 years in the making.
Almost
and
exactly.
It took and
Wow.
we learned so much in order to do this, and part of what we want to provide through it is a structure and a community that gets to fundamentally, and I would say cellularly, shift the way that we get to interact with the structures and the laws of man, and a reorientation and a rooting inside of God's law that trumps it, natural law which trumps it, man's law, and the world of appearances and illusions, and so it's just taken down many of our illusions along the way and fortified us in the essence of the God essence, or the home frequency, I also call it.
I love how you're smiling when you're talking about it. That's just beautiful to witness.
Thank you.
So can you talk a bit more in practical ways? Let's say I myself or someone else would like to engage in that offering within the church, the temple. How would we do that, to make it a bit more tangible for people, if that is already, as far as the development goes, ready to be shared?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we officially launch membership services on the solstice, and in the meantime, we'll have links that we can give you. But we have an Instagram where people can stay in touch with us. We have a website where people can hop on.
Well, let's tell them what's inside the membership.
Yeah. Do you want to start?
Well, I think a big part of it, and why I smile so much, is because this really feels like you, my love, are coming out in your kingdom building in a big way. And I've been in the spiritual entrepreneurial space for a long time. I'm pretty active on social media and all of that, and I think you haven't been as much. So it feels what really is enlivening me and I feel so much joy is like, I feel like you're going to be coming out in your mastery. And, one of the things that Clay studied really deeply is spiritual law and the intersection of spiritual law and man's law. And there's all sorts of benefits to going into this, and one of the most practical reasons people would enter into it is like to reduce the siphoning, the energetic siphoning that taxation is, right? But it's so much deeper than that. And so he'll be offering, what are we calling them? State crafting? I thought kingdom building, but state crafting sessions for people who, more so want to really get into the law aspect of it. And then we're wanting to also, I think, what we saw such a deep need for, of course, during like the pandemic or plandemic or, whatever that was, is the spiritual protection that religious freedom grants us. Mm-hmm. And so if you had a job that was trying to mandate some kind of like medical experiment that you didn't want to participate in, having a church affiliation is lawful protection from something like that. So the way that I see this time on the planet, right, is that like there are the grids are just lighting up with what I would say are like these sealed safe hubs or like heaven on earth hubs. And like what the church is for us is that. And like, because we want and we know and we see how deeply important community is, and if Clay is going to be supporting people in creating perhaps their own church, mm-hmm. like having also a network of churches, so very much like Knights of the Round Table vibes, and like a network of churches, so that he can help people set up their own churches and their own mm-hmm. sort of structures of, and it's not just about protection, it's actually about like interfacing mm-hmm. with the system, right, in a way that's fundamentally like, I know that I am the value and the power, and like you only have that to the extent that I would bestow it to you. And like mm-hmm. now that I've remembered who I am, we're gonna have a conversation this way instead, which is like, because there's so much. I know that I was like, what, like how does this work? What is the deal with this like health insurance that I need and this car insurance that I need, and like all of this stuff, and like there's so much collapse in people's energetic system of like, it's overwhelming and I can't do it, so I'm just going to do what I'm told. So this is for people who are coming out of that and really wanting to, because there's so much talk, right, of like I'm a sovereign being, and it's like, okay, but like how are you actualizing that? And so what we wanted to create is a pathway for really actualizing mm-hmm. that sovereignty and having it be fundamental to how you're living in the world, not just like beyond the 3D. I know that I'm sovereign, but like even here, right? And so much of the work I do with women is like I've been saying in Erotic Alchemy, which is a container I'm running right now, of like when we incarnate fully, when we're inhabiting our senses fully, it fundamentally shifts the way we experience the world. And when we're in our wombs, right, oriented from our wombs, that seat of feminine consciousness, it's quite psychedelic because we're feeling the interconnection and the dynamism that is underneath all the forms and all of the appearances, right? It's like these constructs, they seem very real, but they're not as solid. Like, and when you see from that deeper place and you see the interconnection and you see the dynamism moving through life constantly, and I believe this is where it's like Eros is our best guide. Eros is our best guide because it is yoked to these eternal principles of love and truth, how they express through the moment, so that we can meet the need of the moment in the most resonant way. And now I'm all over the place. But, essentially that when we incarnate fully, right? It's only from being fully in the body and going to like our lowest centers, and again coming back to like there's so much locked up typically in the pelvis, and is specifically unlocked through sexual energy, that fundamentally stabilizes us and transforms us, and that to really come into the body and hold ourselves, right? So this is like when you've made the decision to come into your body, this is a way that you get to hold yourself. And so, yeah, seeing the fundamental, I would say, cellular and embodiment shift as Clay went through this logos, was profound. Just for me to
profoundly
watch.
Unexpected also.
I have to say that I really appreciate the practicality and the groundedness. That is something that I feel is deeply missing in the spiritual evolution that we are going through currently, because everyone's doing a lot of etheric work, energy work, even somatic work, but what we need is actually like structures that are embedded in, let's say, the 3D world, and actually shift that. And what I'm taking in from your creation is that it's really, really grounded in the 3D world, and actually provides like a portal into a higher world for people. So thank you for your endeavor, for your creation. I'm so excited to see that unfolding.
Thank you.
Yeah,
and it reminds me of something that I think came through our first attempt recording this podcast, about the way that I and we see and teach and transmit embodiment, is that this is like a way of being, like a conscious moment to moment practice of how we're being in the world. It's not like, and it's wonderful to have embodiment practices where it's like I'm going to my mat to do my embodiment practice, and I'm all for that. And it's like your actual embodiment practice is in the sensational relational moments, or in the moments that you're confronted with a structure or a system that feels inorganic, and like, who am I in relationship to that? So it's like, I wanted to just like draw that out even more, because it's a deep embodiment shift, and we are really, really committed to being here. And it's like, how do we hold equal reverence for immanence and transcendence, and recognize that true transcendence that goes multi-lifetime, right? Because you can come in and you can decide that you don't really want to deal with having a body and like live in the ethers as much as you want, but you're gonna next lifetime you're gonna have the same choice. And it's like only when we really fully descend and alchemize do we shift what happens beyond just this lifetime to like our soul or our etheric body. So we're very committed to that. Being here fully, right? We didn't come here to just dip out. Totally. And I want to have the glory of being human on Earth.
Speaking of the Holy Human podcast, this is why I created the podcast, to have people like you on here, merging the holy, the sacredness, the higher, perfect human with this more human, like the chaotic, all over the place, vulnerable, weird human experience, right? And then merging and marrying the two. That is what we are all about, right? The three of us. So it's just exciting having you on here and seeing everything unfolding.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
We appreciate your questions.
What's currently alive for you? Is there anything for you, Clay, perhaps, that you want to share that wants to come through?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Hannah brought up practices, and I think that's a good segue. I know that when I look back over my evolution, one thing that stopped me, that propelled me into kind of the upper half of my body, right? Like, I don't want to exist. I don't want to be here. I just want to be in like this more transcendental realm, was this idea that I need to be done, or I need to like know the whole plan before I get started. And if, Hannah brought up this like spiritual law aspect, and I mean, practically what that means oftentimes is, there are certain spiritual texts that that function the same way. Like I've found a lot more appreciation for the Bible in this context, and reading legalese is fairly difficult on purpose, right? It's very convoluted, and it can feel really daunting. And the way that I've found that I read it is I just have to sit down and I have to read over like the same page 3 times, 5 times. And what it instills is a way of getting really clear about what's being said in any sort of interaction, right? It like refines capacity for language. It refines capacity for meaning. And it's done one sentence at a time. And that feels really boring to people. But what that's opened up for me is how valuable taking things in those short bites, and how like actually enjoyable it can be, and how much, divinity, so to speak, or how much of God is in those single steps. And as we grow out of that process, it becomes, that's how we operate, or that's how I operate in life now, is it's like I can see the next part of the path illuminated, and there's a lot of joy in taking that next action without having to know, 6 months out, a year out. And that's where the interplay for me becomes, being a creator turned towards God, is that I have,
and in a generative
union, is that there's a relationship there with, how life creates, and, structure responds to life, responds to structure, responds to life, and they grow together.
Organic architecture.
Which is what organic architecture is. Exactly. And so, you wouldn't have something be entirely structure up front, and then, and then the tree grows.
And this is the problem with a lot of what exists in the world.
Yeah.
Right? Because we mistake the structure or the form to be more concrete than it is, and it comes to suffocate life.
Exactly.
And so organic architecture in
that.
union. Yeah. And so, part of the reason I think it's been a slow burn, like I said, it really mirrors the process of the church creation too, is it's like we're not giving any of our conscious creatorship power or potential potency away to forms or constructs.
Mm-hmm. And it's a really conscious choice that at first feels dense, because for me at least, it was like, oh, look how much I've sort of given to other people, other structures, other entities that I've asked to handle the difficult stuff for me, right? Because I didn't feel like I had the penetrating energy or like the experience to learn it myself. And what I found so much grace in is just actually taking the first step to starting to build a relationship with, me in full embodiment and connection with all that I'm creating, all that we're creating. Yeah. And there's a step-by-step freedom. And that's for me what's really brought, and I think for us, what's brought the grounding that you spoke to earlier, is it's like, that density is a refinement. That density is an initiation. The density of being in the 3D is supposed to be here to galvanize our ability, and our genius, is how I experience it. And, and leaning into that, it just pours forth so much life into the being.
Power and energy and resilience.
So if I could advocate, or at least just share how much that's moved me and moved us, and how much more I create now also, like how much actually more productive that I am from a different place than I ever was before.
Well,
it's just like, it's hilarious. It's so opposite what I would have thought.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And
man, just so many like fuck yes when I'm listening to you expressing that, like the 3D world is galvanizing. I just love how you express that, and I'm tipping my hat to you, Clay, for diving into these deeper 3D structures like the law, for example, I know how extremely exhausting and boring this can be, but just extracting the gold out of it, that's what we need.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It feels like, a few other principles that I would just weave, that what he just said, that also with things we've also touched on in this conversation is, as we're evolving together and when we have this mutuality in place, like there's ways that another kind of like place that I see is it went from pretty much we honor if there's a reality that someone needs to rest, one of us needs to rest or doesn't have like the power to do a thing in a moment. But like for the most part, we really hold ourselves to the standard of like we have the power to move the needle forward, and like it's a big deal to have that kind of standard that you hold for yourself of like, I have the power to do this. I have the power to, like in this case, like penetrate this dense legalese thing. And I see that being one of the major ways that you've been fortified in this process. And I'm so grateful. And I really feel, and I've felt this whole time, 3 years that it's been going on, that this is going to be something that you share and offer at like, because I just saw what happened as he went through it, and I'm thrilled about it. I feel a grounded elation about it.
A grounded elation. Yeah, I'm feeling the same. I'm excited to see you moving more into the public as well, on social media. Would you like to, Hannah, expand on organic architecture? I feel that's so interesting. Just the concept and how you're weaving it into life. Like in the previous try of recording this podcast, you've talked about like concepts and how they serve as a container, and once life outgrows that container, we need to let it go and then like form another container, like in context to organic architecture. If you want to expand on that.
Oh, it would be my pleasure. Yeah, so because we did start to touch on it a little bit, the idea that when we're in our minds, when we're predominantly living from a mental place, we see things as fixed, because the nature of the mind is like, I want to categorize things and label things, and then I know what they are, and then they are always that. And that's actually not reality, right? That's an illusion, that's an appearance, like because life itself is in perpetual ecstatic motion, but at the very least it's constantly shifting, right? And so to be in reality, I think this is like another fundamental characteristic of organic architecture, is it's like you see things as they are, you see life as it is, and you're interacting with a fundamental isness, not an appearance.
A projection.
Right, yeah, not a projection or not a construct. And certainly, and if it is a construct, you're engaging with the construct in this sense of, I know that it appears fixed, but it's not actually. Right, and so when there's an over-reliance on constructs, which, a lot of people, spiritual community, conscious relationship work, it's like we're looking for a formula. It's like we just want to figure it out and like lock into that track and be set. And like that's like the sort of like subconscious, unconscious, maybe conscious drive. Like we're looking for the formula. And the thing is, and this is one of the great initiations on the path of eros, is if I think that I've found it and locked myself into a track, then I'm destined to fall asleep and go off the rails. Like if you think that you've locked it in, right, then that's the sure sign that at some point, down the road, down the line, you're going to wake up and be like, how is this my life? Where, like, you know, it's like we don't realize how we are making there's just constant choice points, and we're always evolving. And so when you're really like, okay, I'm gonna be with things as they are, and like myself as dynamic self, right? Like to me, it's like not about so much a true self as full sovereign conscious co-creatorship over this domain of energy, right? That is mine, like this sovereign domain of energy that is mine to be responsible for, and how I'm creating with that. What frequencies or like cosmic forces and principles will I bear and transmit, emanate, be a vessel for? Because it's not like the self is not fixed. We are not static. And so how can you possibly have a relationship between two beings who know that we're dynamic and not fixed? And that's what organic architecture is. It's like, how do you allow for that constant dynamism to not feel destabilizing? Because so often we're looking for our partner, right? And this comes from like the more you fortify yourself and your home frequency and stay in your center, the less you're going to be like needing them to stabilize you. And it can feel like you want to count on who someone is, right? And so it's like there are things absolutely that I know are like in your essence, and that I know we're mutually aligned with, or like mutually yoked to.
In service to, yeah.
Yeah, and in service to. And that would be like eros and Christ and truth and love, and like, so it's like there are these principles that we do hold, not only like rely on each other, but like hold each other accountable to. But there's also even more of us that is dynamic and evolving. And so organic architecture is, how do you create support and containment that serves rather than suffocates the life of the connection, the life of what's between you and what is you. So it's like,
Well,
I think of it like, you know, and I love it because like flowers, trees, all of these things in nature, they grow towards the sun. And it's like the structure is supportive. And it's very different what a lot of people, when they're seeking a formula, end up not building internal structure, because the external structure that they've been enrolled in is holding them together or holding them up. It's supporting them. And so organic architecture is, how do you have structure that supports and furthers your internal fortification, right? And so, to me, that's the only way I can know something's true. That's the only way I can know that it's ordained, is it's like, if we're both like internally aligned with it and clear, right? It's not like I have this prescription for a union, or this prescription for how I'm supposed to be in my business, or my prescription for how I'm supposed to be in the way that I interact with something. Because all of that, when we give our power away to a formula, we either go to sleep, we go to sleep and we stop making conscious choices about it, or we end up like, it ends up that that's the glue, rather than like alignment with God being the glue. Simply. that keeps us together, that keeps me in my center, all the things.
I'm constantly seeing the image of like a metallic construct, like a metallic building, versus like a tree, for example.
Exactly.
Nature building, natural architecture, basically. Like a tree has a very fortified structure, so to speak, but it's alive. It's constantly renewing itself. It's breathing. It's living. And like a metallic modern building is just there. And you can't, it's suffocating you if you expand.
Exactly. And it's like you're slowly slowly dying inside of it. It's slowly draining the life out of you, because to try and hold yourself accountable to a construct, you inevitably end up trying to hold yourself accountable to a past version of yourself. And unfortunately, this happens a lot in relationships, where people end up in dynamics where they're being held accountable to a past version of themselves, rather than like, I'm going to meet you new every day. And like, I really think that thinking that we know who we are or who our partner is kind of like a kiss of death. It's like, no, I want to continue to discover you. And like, you know, I feel like the thing for us that we're both devoted to is like, how can we evoke the totality of ourselves and the totality of each other? Because just as the one is within all is within the one. And like, we're here to discover that moment to moment. And so this is why it's always enlivening also.
This lights me really up. I mean, I can relate to this so much. Years ago, I mean, this is really years ago, but when I was in a relationship, I remember when she said like, I thought you were so and so. You said you're like this. And then that's like holding to rigidity, and you're constantly evolving. So the goal really in a relationship, if you wanna make it sustainable, is really to feel and get to really know the eternal self of the other, if that makes sense. Like really attuning yourself to those core principles, like the Christ that lives within us, God, truth, because that's what's always stable. That's sort of a construct, like an organic framework, so to speak.
And it's internal, right? So it's like, I think of it as like something that's trying to like come from the outside versus something that's like stabilizing and growing like a stem or a tree inside. And I do want to add one more piece to this, because I also, at the same time, and it might seem paradoxical, but to me that's a sign of truth, right? Is that I also am a huge advocate for creating containment. And what I mean by that is that containment is like something that we create for ourselves to dismantle vigilance, or to feel safe enough to like let go and surrender very deeply inside of. And the key here is that, so containment can look like a construct, but it's being inside of the containment that we're creating for a specific purpose of healing something or maturing something or like opening into something, right? So it's like, if there's something that you feel like there's some wounded part of you, right, that wants to grow and evolve, you would create containment, which is another way of saying like a conscious practice or a specific game for how you're going to work with that part to love it and mature it. Or like, you know, for women, a great one is like, or, and I'll give an example for men too, but like a great one is like, I'm going to, like, I notice that I always withhold part of like my desire, or like I'm just gonna start asking you for the full thing, and like you don't have to meet it in the moment, right? But like I'm gonna, for me, bring my voice out in that way. Or for men, like a great practice is like sanity testing, which is like, I think I feel you in this way. Is this really what's happening inside of you, to like build their own intuition? So it's like you create these games, you create containment around particular things so that you can deepen, because containment is it's a confining the width so that the depth can like just like open. And so I'm a huge proponent or advocate of creating containment for the purposes of like gamifying and developing in certain ways, and then it's being inside of containment, knowing that it has a specific purpose, and when that specific purpose is achieved, right? And achieved is not a word I use often, but I'll say, so how I would say it is like something that's an active practice. Like if you are neurologically rewiring and creating new neural pathways, it's like I'm going to actively be reorienting to like having a certain kind of like belief that like abundance is actually true, not scarcity. Or like, you know, I'm retraining my amygdala to see what is working rather than what's not working. And at a certain point, it's locked. At a certain point, it's like we know, and we no longer need to consciously train our attention in a particular way. And that's when something's embodied. And so once it's embodied, you don't need that containment anymore, and you dissolve it. And you find like, okay, what's the next thing? Like there's this endless appetite for like, okay, like what more are we becoming? What more are we developing? Like, you know, and creating new games in new containers. So it's like, absolutely, you get to have your containment. And then how can you relate with it of like, this isn't permanent. This is serving a purpose. And then we'll be asked to dissolve it and go into the next one.
Mic drop, Hannah.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a beautiful one.
Thank you for adding that part of containment. So important. And I totally agree.
Because it's not just like, you know, to throw care to the wind at all. Because we want to, like, it's really like slowing down to be as conscious as possible of all of the micro moments we're making choices.
And in a lot of ways, certain, like that certainty that you get in small amounts of containment, it builds trust. And like trust kind of serves a big aspect of knowing or feeling stabilized, right? Like when we have trust, that embodied sense of structure, you know, it's something that we can lean on even if we don't know the outcome or like the exact direction. And so, you know, that kind of living trust with like, okay, I know this principle as it exists, whether it's like a spiritual principle or an eternal principle, you know.
And I need to add one more thing too, which is that this is also why union, partnership, and like there's so much more that we can say about like how do you know that you're with the right person. But I'll say another one is it's like your games go really well together. Like the games that you're playing for your own evolution go great together. And you know, I've definitely noticed that it's like the places that we're balanced, we're both more balanced or more integrated, and then the places where we might be less integrated, we tend to have the opposite polarity of whatever that spectrum is in each other. So it's like we really, like our titration fortifies each of our integrations and alignments. And so we have a lot of fun with the games. And it's part of, again, why it's continually enlivening.
Awesome. So nice having you two here. Okay,
so nice
let's
to be
approach.
Thank you for having us.
Let's approach the landing of this conversation. Is there anything that still wants to be shared for you? I mean, of course, the your offers and your where people can reach you will be linked in the show notes. But you can, of course, bring that up as well right now.
I feel like it already weaved in wonderfully.
Yeah.
Organic architecture and Tri-Unity Temple. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, so for all of the listeners and viewers, it will all be linked down below. And if you want to reach out to Hannah, work with her, you can on Instagram, right? People can find you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Link that, and that's definitely where I'm the most active. So it's perfect.
Wonderful. So I'd say anything that you want to add, Clay?
No, there'll be a lot more to come, but I think that for all the men out there listening to this, you know, it's a really beautiful. There is a path to where you don't have to know the outcome, and you can feel really like supported, empowered, and powerful, and kind of meet this dynamic essence in this way. And for a long time, I thought it was like an impossible game, and I had no experience in it, and
It's just taking you out of control
yeah,
constantly.
and it was like how am I supposed to like create in the world when the world is this dynamic and presenting me with new things, and I'm changing direction in a way, and there's absolutely practices and ways to like generate through that. And what I've found is that like is that responding to life in this dynamic way, letting go of having to figure out the outcome, has like made me the man that I've always wanted to be. And in a big part that's like come through my relationship with Hannah because of what she's committed to bringing through in our relationship. So, you know, union is something that emboldens and enlivens and empowers every aspect of our life, our professional life. It just makes us grow in a way that serves everything. And so, as daunting and challenging as it can seem sometimes, it's really worth it.
And I've become the woman that also. So, yeah, it's really
With that, such
so much gratitude.
beautiful words.
Yeah.
Ending on union, sacred union. Hopefully, this episode with Hannah and Clay served you well. I'd greatly appreciate if you leave an honest review or subscribe to my YouTube channel. And again, thank you for being here, for tuning in, and for journeying with us. And with that, Felix checking out, hopefully seeing you in the next episode. Have a wonderful day.